You might wonder, how in the world, what am I doing here? We've heard stories of redemption and inspiration. Well, to the poetry professor, I will say, my favorite poem is an E.E. Cummings poem, I Carry Your Heart. And actually, when I was not at work in the White House, I loved reading poetry. And to the filmmaker of gratitude, I would say that for me, at least, and I think for many, public service was an act of gratitude. I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school. I am the granddaughter of immigrants. And so public service was a way to give back and really was an act of gratitude. You know, when you hear these fabulous stories of redemption and inspiration, I say to myself, look, I could be the little black cloud at this conference, right, and I've got nothing but bad news. I would say to you, when you think about the title, Homeland Insecurity, Are We Safer? Let me start with the good news. The answer is, right now, because of increased capabilities across multiple administrations, this country is safer than it has ever been because of the capabilities that we've invested in as a nation, both at the state and local level, at the federal level, and internationally. The bad news is NYPD Commissioner Ray Kelly said on the 9/11 anniversary this year, the threats are also as bad, if not worse than they were on 9/11. We don't control the threats. We control our capability and how we can respond to them, how we're prepared to disrupt and dismantle them, and that's what we have to focus on maintaining. So what do we expect the next likely attack is going to be? What will it look like? Will it be, and I will tell you when I speak to groups and you ask for a show of hands, one, will it include explosives or firearms? Almost all the hands go up. Will it include a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear weapon? Most hands stay down. It's too unfathomable to think about those consequences. What about cyber? Will it be a cyber attack? You get about half the folks saying that. And when you ask me, what I say is it's likely to be a combination of more than one of those. So Defense Secretary Leon Panetta talked about his great fear being that the next 9/11 type attack would be a cyber Pearl Harbor. And what I would say to you is it's most likely to look like, imagine a cyber attack turning off the lights in the Northeast Corridor, taking down the FAA system or your financial system. But as that happens, there's likely to be also the more traditional attack. As we're dealing with some attack against our infrastructure, we're likely also dealing with some sort of physical attack, whether it's an explosive or an IED or that sort of thing. And so the system will be overwhelmed. It will be challenged. And that's why it's important at a state and local level, at a community level, we have our arms and our minds wrapped around resiliency. The answer is you're not going to stop every attack from happening, but what you do control is how you respond to it. How you respond to it at a community level, how you respond to it at a national level, and how you respond to it on an international level. Now, internationally, there are tremendous threats. The borders that protected us in the 20th century, because of the ease of travel and the quickness of communications, no longer protect us in the way they did. They don't protect us here in the 21st century the way they did in the 20th century. It's just the reality. And the most dangerous weapons in the world are in the hands of unstable governments around the world, many of whom support terror. Who am I talking about? Iran is the single, we think about Iran and we think about the nuclear issue, but in fact, Iran is the single largest state sponsor of terror. They finance Hezbollah, which has actually killed Americans in Lebanon in the 1980s, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, and they arm Hezbollah and the Syrian regime with the most dangerous weapons. Syria, we know, has a chemical weapons regime program that they've used against their own people. And look at a country that has been, more or less, an ally in the war on terror. Pakistan has a nuclear arsenal at the same time they support the Taliban on the other side of the border in Afghanistan. And so you've got this dichotomy of unstable states. When we look for the threats internationally, you know, I tell people this notion of Homeland Security, it's sort of a weird name. Let's just be honest. It got called the Department of Homeland Security because we didn't want to have an interior ministry. In every other country around the world, the security function is vested in a thing called the Interior Department. We didn't like the sound of that, and so we called it Homeland Security. But the fact remains, if we wait until a threat is here inside our borders to address it, we are most likely to fail. So we have to push those borders back. We have to push those borders out. And we have to address these threats with the help of our allies around the world, overseas. What does that mean? That doesn't necessarily mean the US operating in these countries. What it means is helping to build their capability. We must not be short-sighted about these investments. I traveled all over North Africa and the Middle East. We work very hard to help build the capability of these services to work with us so that we don't have to deploy military, intelligence, and law enforcement assets in foreign nations. We don't always succeed, but it doesn't mean it's not worth the investment. So, what do we expect will happen? Let me talk for a moment about the cyber threat, because I happen to agree with former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta about the seriousness of the cyber threat. If I were to ask people in this room to raise their hands if they have a mobile device, every hand will go up. In fact, I'd raise both hands because I carry 2 devices, so I have them on different carriers. But what does that mean? You know, there was a time in law enforcement in the 1980s that if you wanted to track somebody, you had a device called a slapper. It was a GPS device you put underneath a drug dealer's car so you knew where he was. The answer is we don't need those anymore because every one of you carries a mobile device that could be used to track your location in real time. Technology has advanced to the point that it has allowed this capability in the government. The problem is it's also allowed this capability with the bad guys. Where do we see it? Well, as you all know, you would have read in the newspaper, a foreign government, who can at least remained deniable, sent a bolt down the ether and destroyed many of the centrifuges in Iran's nuclear program. The software package was called Stuxnet. There's been much written about that. But by the same token, while that was used offensively to damage the Iranian nuclear program, months later, Iran, using a similar technique, sends the bolt down the ether, and it destroys more than 20,000 hard drives inside Saudi's oil facility company, Aramco. These are, arguably, in both instances, acts of war. Our policies, both legal and sort of our government policies, have had a really hard time keeping up with the development of technology. Just as I was getting up here, Mark Daly handed me his BlackBerry, and I was reading an article on the New York Times site, another Snowden leak. New York Times reports that the government since 2010 has been able to analyze metadata of email and look for connections. Well, by the way, metadata analysis is done all the time by American corporations. Those targeted ads on the sides when you're on Amazon or Google or in almost any website are the result of metadata analysis to micro-target ads to you when you're on the internet. You're conscious of that, you're aware of it. It's not really objectionable, you've sort of accepted it. Suddenly, when we understand that our government may be touching those communications, even when it's metadata, so it's not looking at the content of your communications, people become uncomfortable. It's understandable. And I will say to you, you know, having been in the White House when we began the development of policies related to drones or enhanced interrogation techniques, also known as torture, and all sorts of other kinds of programs that good people trying to help to protect the country implemented in good faith. What you realize is, whether it's drones or it's metadata, massive analytic capability against email traffic, we need a public debate. And frankly, you can have that public debate without the sort of damaging leaks that you wind up with when Edward Snowden steals documents contrary to both law and his own employment agreement and dumps them out into the public. It's not a public service. Your tax dollars, your hard-earned, paid tax dollars, were spent to build capability that gives the government an advantage over its adversaries. One individual largely destroys that advantage by making a selfish decision to dump that out in public. I do think we need a public debate. And I think there have got to be forums where people can talk about the capabilities. How do you strike the privacy versus civil liberties and security policies? But we don't have an environment where we seem to be able to do that. I will tell you, there's nothing, one of the real blessings of having worked across multiple administrations, I worked both in the Reno Justice Department during the Clinton administration and then in the Bush White House. Quick story, it was great. Everybody thought I worked for the other team. So really, the Democrats were sure I was a Republican because I worked in the Bush White House. And by the way, the Republicans were sure I was a Democrat because I'd worked for Janet Reno. My third week in the White House, I come in, I'm lucky I now know the path between my office and the ladies' room. And there is a full 750-word article, huge headline that says, "The Enemy Within." It's all about me. It's a conservative columnist who's decided that the Democrats have gotten me in the George Bush White House, and now we're really in trouble. Look, that divisiveness, I couldn't agree more when you say that politics is a force for division. It is also on our security policy. And that's unfortunate because to the extent we allow that to happen, we are all less safe. One quick story from my time overseas. Because I came from a family of not much means, I had not traveled outside the country until I was almost 30 years old. So imagine me, I find myself in the White House, and I'm now representing the president overseas, not only overseas, but in the Middle East and North Africa, not exactly known for their respect and treatment of women. And I actually was treated with tremendous respect by these governments. My first and most important trip overseas was to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where I was meeting with then the Crown Prince, who's now king. I spent more time in Saudi Arabia than any other country in the world, working on issues like terror finance. And I was very concerned about the importance of the trip and the need to be successful. And so I had done a lot of reading, a lot of studying. I get off the plane, and I noticed that the men are swinging kind of beads, and I don't really know what they are. And so I asked one of the security officials, what is that? And they explained to me very kindly that these are prayer beads. In Islam, you meditate on the 99 names of the Prophet. So you go around 3 times. There are 33 beads. You go around 3 times, meditating on the names of the names of Allah. And so it's interesting, being an Irish Catholic, my mother convinced me at an early age that I would, if I didn't carry my rosary everywhere I went, including I have them here, I'd be hit by a bus. So of course, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, no joke, I'm carrying in my pocket these rosary beads, completely sort of unaware that it's a crime, punishable by death in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So interesting to the non-Catholics here, you go around 3 times, by the way, meditating on the life of Jesus. I'm in the meeting with the king, and it's not going so well. He's in his, at that time, 80s, I'm a woman. I mean, we're not having a whole lot in common, and I'm worried about going back to the President of the United States saying I came back with absolutely no progress. And I can hear him jingling something in his pocket, and I realize it must be his prayer beads. And so you talk about the proverbial Hail Mary pass. I'm sitting with the ambassador and all these security officials, and in a last-ditch effort, I pull out the rosary beads. There is a gasp among the American officials thinking they're going to have to get me out of the country. And I say to the king, "You have your prayer beads." And he takes them out, and I explain to him, I too go around 3 times, just as he goes around 3 times. And that if he and I can focus on what we have in common, as opposed to the long list of things that we differ on, we can actually make progress for both countries. He never forgot the story. I would submit to you this weekend, when all of Washington doesn't seem to be able to find anything to agree on, including keeping the government open, that on this, on race issues, on politics generally, if we can try to put our differences aside and focus on the things we're trying to achieve together, security, the debt, healthcare. I mean, we have things in common that we'd actually achieve something. Service has been not only an act of gratitude, but an absolute privilege. And I must say to Mark Dowley, to the group here at the Nantucket Project, it has been an honor to be included here with you today, and now I will let you get to your lunch.